Hey, I'm Mr. Williamson. This is the second video in the genetics unit. Before we get started, make sure you're taking good notes. As I've said all year, I really like the Cornell style for students. It allows them to annotate it. I personally would use outline, but you do whatever makes your dog bark. Honestly, this video is going to be a whole hodgepodge of different subjects, so you need to be paying attention. Make sure you get them all down in your notes because I'm going to be checking them. Let's get started. Genetic recombination. We talked about this in the meiosis unit and a little bit in the past this unit. We're talking about the reassortment of genes through basically two things we've already talked about in the unit 6, meiosis, crossing over and independent assortment. What are those? Well, independent assortment, remember, we're talking about each one of these pairs of chromosomes are going to be separated. That's Mendel's second law, second principle, the law of segregation, principle of segregation. But you don't, just because you give the first one from one does not mean you're going to give the first one from the second one. It could be you give the second one. And as we talked about, there are over 8.3 million combinations of those. All right, so there's the first way that we can randomly mix up the genes. The second one is through crossing over. Every one of those pairs we can cross over during meiosis 1. During metaphase, where the chromosomes line up, the homologous pairs of chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell. Their legs cross, and the DNA from moms goes to dads, the DNA from dads goes to moms. So every one of these could experience crossing over. Let's say right here, they could break off there, they could break off over there, and they'd switch. So not only do you have that 8.3 million combinations, but then you have an infinite pairs of combinations depending on which ones of these switched. All right? Polyploidy. Like I said, this video is going to be a whole smorgasbord of different information. Stay with me. I've always told you so far that you have two kinds of cells, haploid and diploid. Haploid are sex cells that have half the DNA because we've cut it down to half. Diploid or normal body cells, all right? And once in a while we have more than two after we've replicated the DNA during the S phase of interphase, and then it goes through G2, gets ready to replicate, and then mitosis, it goes back to diploid, 2N. There are actually cells that are polyploid. They have more than two pairs of chromosomes for each one of those. Normally it only occurs in some plants, and if it actually occurs in some of your organs like your liver, your kidneys, and things like that. There are cells that are actually have more than just the two pairs of chromosomes. Why? I have no clue, but I'm supposed to talk about it, so I did. Covered that one. Check it off. All right, we're talking about homozygous. Basically, homozygous means that we have two of the same gene. So we're looking at the genotype, all right? Remember, the genotype you can't see. Homo means same, all right? So if we're talking about a homozygous genotype, it's either going to be big, or it's going to be little, all right? Up till now, I've been like, for Mendel's experiments, I use like Y or GG, all right? Those would be homozygous. Technically, that's not correct. Normally, we take the dominant gene and we use that initial, dominant trait, and use that initial. So like in peas, yellow was the dominant trait. So in peas, we would use capital Y for the dominant, and we would use lowercase y for the recessive. If we were talking about eye color, we would use probably big B for brown because it's dominant, lowercase b for blue because it's recessive. So we're going to stop kind of doing this over here. We're not going to use YYGG. We're going to use big letters, the initial of the dominant gene trait, and for the dominant, the uppercase initial of the dominant trait, and the lowercase initial of the dominant trait will be the recessive. Even though maybe in this case, you know, this would be yellow. This is yellow over here. The recessive trait is green. We're still going to use a lowercase y because the dominant trait is yellow, so we're going to use a capital Y for yellow, and the green is going to be lowercase. But homozygous, again, homozygous means that they have the same. So they're going to be big, big, or little, little. That's really colorful right there. You got to appreciate that page. Anyways, let's move on. The opposite of that is heterozygous, meaning they have different alleles. Or like, as you can see, big T and a little t. Or in Mendel's P's, we started out with Y, Y, and lowercase y, and lowercase y, and that's the P1 generation. In the F1 generation, we ended up with Y, lowercase y. That's a heterozygous chromosome or gene, all right? Sometimes it's referred to as a hybrid because it has both of them in it. Homozygous, again, big, big, or little, little, all right? Heterozygous, big, little, or it also could be little, big. Either one, doesn't matter. Those are T's. They don't look like T's, but they're T's. All right. Let's talk about some disorders that can happen. That we've talked about homozygous and heterozygous. Check that one off. Not that I gave you a list to check off, but that's what we're doing. Okay. Recessive genetic disorders. Recessive genetic disorders only occur if both parents carry the gene because it's recessive. So, for instance, we are actually going to watch a video on Tay-Sachs. All right? The only way you can get this disorder, it's not a disease. A disease is something you catch. It's contagious. This is not contagious. It's genetic. It's once in a while they'll call it a disease, but it's really a disorder. The only way you can get this is if one of your parents has it, and I'm going to use T's. Okay, there's the recessive disorder. And if the other parent also has it, there's the recessive disorder. If that's the one they pass on, if both parents pass on the recessive gene for this disorder, that's the only way the offspring can get it. If one parent passes on a big T, if this parent passes on the big T, and this one passes on the little t, that offspring is okay. That's no problem because it's a recessive disorder. The only way it shows up is if both parents pass on the recessive gene. It's kind of like blue eyes. The only way you can have a blue-eyed child is if both parents have the blue-eyed gene and pass it on. If you have a parent who is brown-eyed, but they have if they're big B, little b, they would be brown-eyed, but they carry the blue-eyed gene. If the other parent is big B, little b, they would be brown-eyed, but they carry the blue-eyed gene. If they both give the little b, their child could be blue-eyed. But if one of them gives a big B and a little b, or just a big B, then it's going to be a brown-eyed child. All of these diseases are recessive. All right. Now, I don't expect you to know the diseases. There's no way I'm going to ask you, in cystic fibrosis, what happens? No, I just want you to understand these are examples of recessive genetic disorders. They can only be given by the parent if they give both of the recessive genes. Cystic fibrosis is common in Caucasians, and it basically builds up a mucus in the lungs and the pancreas, and basically you eventually drown. Okay. There's a lot of teachers at King that actually teach cystic fibrosis and discuss it in depth. All right, not my favorite. Albinism, which is the lack of pigment. And again, skin color is really determined by a lot of genes, but there is one particular, if you give the recessive, if you have this order and the parents pass it on, there's a lack of pigment. And it's kind of varies in the strength of the albinism or the degree of albinism. There are some that are just, their skin is pink, their eyes are pink, their hair is not blue, which is most albinos. But they're actually pink because there's no pigment at all. Their hair is shocking white. It's not blonde, it's white. All right. And there are other disorders that go with albinism. There's a visual one, and there's some other things. But normally they can live a completely normal life, except they can't go outside because they have no pigment in their skin to prevent them from getting sunburnt or damaging their skin and things like that, but completely normal. Tay-Sachs, like I said, we're going to watch a video on Tay-Sachs. I'm going to warn you right now, it is extremely sad, but you're going to watch it. But it is causes a cherry red spot at the back of the eye, and honestly, you're usually most of the time the babies that have it die before they reach 5 or 6. The thing is, it's found predominantly among Eastern European Jews, Anasazi Jew. I think I pronounced that right. Jews. That's the group of people that it's usually found in. It can be found outside, but that's the group of people it's usually found in. And then galactosomiasis means that you're glucose intolerant. Again, recessive disorder. You have to get the gene from both parents in order to get it, because the dominant trait is normal. All right? Dominant genetic disorders. Now this one, if one parent passes it on, if both parents, let's just say, if both parents are this, and they pass on this, then you would have a normal kid, because the little b is the normal. But if one of them passes on the big B and the other one passes on the little b, now you've got the disorder. It's a dominant disorder. Or another way to look at it is, you could have one parent that carries the disease. By the way, if they carry the disease, that means they have it, because if it's a dominant disease, or just, again, not a disease, disorder. If it's a dominant disorder and they carry it, that means they have it. They have this disorder. The other parent would not have it. So this is going to give a little b. That parent's going to give a little b. If this one gives the big B, then they have the disorder. Examples are Huntington's, which affects people when they're like 30 to 50 years old, which could be why you don't know, parents don't know they have it, because they can have their children before they symptoms show up. And it causes a loss of brain function, emotional disturbances, and basically 1 in about 10,000 people have it. And I think you're going to find this one kind of interesting. Achondroplasia is dwarfism. All right. The thing is that 75% of the people that have achondroplasia have it from normal parents. Now think about that. Okay, it's a dominant genetic disorder, which means that both parents have to be, I'm just going to use B's because I can tell the difference. Both parents have to be this, because they're normal. If one of them had the dominant gene, if one of them was big B, little b, they would be achondroplasia. They would be a dwarfism. But they don't. They don't have it. But somehow there's a mutation that occurs in this gene, and like it said, 75% are born to normal parents. Interesting fact. Again, don't even know it. I'm not going to quiz you on it. All right. All right, check that one off. Let's talk about pedigrees. This is a pedigree. All right. A pedigree basically shows the family tree. All right, and this is the pedigree for Queen Victoria, and and it goes back. I forget exactly how far, but it goes back to the royal family in England. It's the royal family tree. Now, this happened at least a couple hundred years ago. I probably should look it up, and I probably will, and put it in one of the little pop-out things. But my point, back then, royalty could only marry royalty. Royalty could not marry a commoner. That was not allowed. If you were royal family, you had to marry royal family. That creates a problem. Okay? That's like saying you can only marry someone from your own family. Don't go there, because it's not pretty. Okay? Now, there are some exceptions. Royal family from England could marry a royal family from Spain or from Norway or something like that, Germany. That's royalty. You can do that. And a lot of times that's what was done to prevent wars. I have my daughter and I want her to get married, and I don't want to go to war with Spain, so I have my daughter marry the son of the king of Spain, and because we're family, we're not going to fight each other. Okay? So the way you read this is, you have the starting family. These are the couple that we're starting with, Queen Victoria and Albert. Women are always circles, okay? So Women are always circles, and the squares are always the men. All right? You need to remember that. You also need to look at this key right here. This is a key that shows you hemophilia, which is one of the problems that occurs when you have a lot of marrying or reproducing in the same gene pool, the same group of genes, the same family. All right? If it's white, they carry the gene, and I'm going to explain what this is in a minute. If it's green circle, then they do not have that gene. If it's a blue square, they're a normal male. If it's a orange square, they have hemophilia, and I'm going to explain hemophilia here in a minute. All right? This is the P1 generation. This is the F1 generation. All right? What we're looking at is the lines connect. You can see the lines. Everyone on this line that descends from it is an offspring of this couple. So this guy here, Edward, Victoria, Alice, Alfred, Arthur, Leopold, Helena, Beatrice, they were all the offspring of Queen Victoria and Albert. All right? Which reminds me, here we have like Victoria here, asked Edward, said, hey, how come Mom doesn't ask her brother to help her with all the kids? And Edward said, well, you can't be a brother and a sister too. Think about it. You'll get it later. You'll get it like the weekend, I promise. My point is that because she carried the gene, it was only passed on to one man, Leopold, who then passed it on to Alice, all right, who then gave it to this guy. So what exactly are we talking about? I'm going to come back to this, I think, all right? What are we talking about here? Hemophilia. Hemophilia is where your blood doesn't clot, all right? In a healthy body, you have a normal blood vessel here, and you get a cut. So that's we've cut the blood vessel there. Normally, once that occurs, there's a chemical reaction that takes place, and there's this thing called fibrin. It's like fibers that start to build up in this area of the cut. And then the blood platelets, the red blood cells, get caught in that, and they form a blood clot. And eventually you end up with the clot that stops the bleeding. Well, the problem is, in hemophilia, you don't produce that fibrin. All right? There's a lack of the clotting factor. So when you get a cut, you don't stop the bleeding. You guys get a paper cut, you get a scrape, an hour or two later, it stopped bleeding, Even a pretty good cut with a knife or something, it stops after a little while. If you're a hemophiliac, you can bleed to death from a paper cut. It's that bad. All right? It's a sex-linked gene. It's very similar to a recessive disorder, but it's sex-linked. All right? It has to be on both X's. So the mother carries it over here. She has it on one of her X's, not the other one. All right? So she carries it, but she doesn't have the disorder. She's not a hemophiliac. The man is XY. He doesn't have it. That's the father, the P1 generation. If she passes it on and he passes on the male chromosome, now the child has it on all of his X chromosomes, like a recessive disorder. He has to have it on all of he has to have it on all of the X chromosomes. He'll be a hemophiliac. But if mom passes it on and dad passes on the X, the girl, who is XX, does not have it on both of her X chromosomes. Therefore, she does not have hemophilia. So let's go back to this and take a look at what we can follow here. Queen Victoria carried the gene, so we know that she is XHX because she doesn't have it. It's not on both of her X chromosomes. Albert, we know, is XY. He doesn't have it. Now she passes on to Alice. She passes on the XH. Dad passed on the X. She's a carrier. Alice carries it. Leopold here, he got the XH. So this is Leopold. He had XH. Dad passed on the Y. Leopold now has hemophilia. All right. They had kids. And you can see where each, and you need to know this, these are the kids. This is the F1 generation. This is the P1 generation. This would be the F2 generation. And this would be the F3 if we wanted to go that far. You can see where, what am I trying to say? Okay, you can see where they've each had kids. Like Victoria had a kid, Henry of Prussia. Don't ask, I don't know. Alice had kids, Irene. Now this is where it gets a little weird because, again, can't marry outside the royal family. You're cousins, uncle, aunt. Here's uncle and aunt, and they married, all right? And they had 2 hemophiliac kids. Pedigree, should know how to read it. Again, they're sex-linked genes, meaning what? Meaning that the only way you can get the disorder is if it's on all of your X chromosomes. Is there a way for a girl to get a sex-linked gene? Yes, we'll go over that later. Okay, so this is good-looking hair, isn't it? This is COVID hair. Haven't cut my hair in a long time. Getting one haircut this Friday. All right, anyways. About halfway through the video, we got to an end point, honestly, and to tell you the truth, we're at 21 minutes and 15 seconds plus whatever this becomes, and so I tried to cut it down. There's about another 18 minutes, honestly. There's a lot of video left, so I'm cutting it in half. Hopefully you took good notes. If you have any questions, make sure you ask them in Ed Puzzle. And finally, good luck.